what I said is, but what I want to do is I want to affect 1 million people's lives. And so that's my goal. And I'm really short of it now. And I have, maybe I'm 61, maybe I have 10, 20 years left to do it. Who knows? But I'm going to try. So I'm always thinking, how do I do that? What are the ways that I can affect people? And I can do clients, and clients have a factor, because I don't just say I'm affecting one person's life. I'm affecting, if I affect a CEO, I'm also affecting his or her team and probably the family members of them, because if they're better, they're happier, they're less stressed, then I'm affecting those people's lives as well. So I have a little factor that I use. It's factor 64. For every leader I work with, I multiply by 64. If I sell a book, it's one. I don't count when I speak to people, because it's hard to really know if I mean, I could probably do it, but I.
Overpressure refers to the sudden increase in pressure above the surroundings caused by the wave generated when something explodes. It propagates outward from the origin, capable of causing impact, momentum, or disruption, depending on its intensity and distance. It is a critical factor in assessing the effects of a mission. Welcome to the Overpressure podcast, where we dive into the explosive world of business for entrepreneurs who are vets or veteran entrepreneurs. On today's episode of the Overpressure podcast, we have Bill Flynn coming to us out of Boston. He has been in the business space for a long, long time, coaching businesses, helping them with their performance and moving forward. We focus a little bit on leadership today, which of course you guys know I love, and dive deep into how that can apply to growing a brand. So check out this amazing author, speaker, and hope you guys get a lot out of it. Hey, we want to welcome Bill today, Bill Flynn, and he has an incredible career that's been going on almost as long as I've been alive. So I'm excited to dive in and look at some of the lessons that you've taken from that career, including a couple IPOs, which, that's a goal for us one day. So would love to dive in to all of the things. So with your career, it seemed like you had started out in sales and, had grown in a lot of ways from there. Kind of what brought you into what you're doing?
Thank you for having me
today
on, Austin. I appreciate it. So what I do today is I sort of do three things. One is I'm mainly what one might call a business growth coach. So what I do is I basically teach management science in digestible bits to leaders and their leadership teams, so they can run a healthy and thriving organization and business. One of the ways I do that is I write. So I have one book out, which is Further, Faster. You can sort of see it over my shoulder there on the wall. And I have written 6 other books, which hopefully will come out over the next 5 to 8 years, I guess. And the first one's being shopped by my agent right now. And then I do some speaking on the side as well. So I do some part-time speaking about these kinds of topics. But mainly I'm there to help people sort of make their own mistakes and not make the mistakes that I made.
Well, I mean, I love the topic of leadership, so we can definitely go there. Who were some inspirations? It almost sounded a little like Drucker might be in there.
Yeah, so thought leaders.
Who are your leadership
So thought leaders
inspirations?
are different than leaders. Most of the thought leaders that I know never led anything, which is interesting. So like Drucker he was a journalist first. He never led any companies at all. He had actually no operational experience, but he was a really good collector of information and things. And then there's Deming and Shine and McGregor and Bennis, and it's interesting. A lot of them are just sort of theorists, etc. My favorite leader that actually has done something, his name is Alan Mulally. I don't know if you know who he is. Yeah, it's really funny. No one knows who Alan Mulally is.
I'm not familiar.
Alan Mulally, in my opinion, and I've studied leadership for 30 years, and I could cite lots of leaders, is the singular leader at least in the United States, that we've ever had. And the reason I say that is Alan Mulally ran Boeing commercial aircraft through 9/11, and then he
Okay.
led Ford Motor Company
Mm,
through 2008. So he had them coming out of those existential crises
okay.
aimed exactly at that industry. He had them coming out better than they went in. And
Right. I think I've actually heard of his part that he played in Ford of really taking them back to their roots and bringing it to like the mass
yeah,
audience that they were
yeah.
so
So
well
he,
known for. Is that
when
him?
he left, it wasn't while he was there, but
Okay.
in 2015, after he left, Ford became the number one car company in the world again. The last time was under Henry Ford.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, and then Mark Fields
Yeah,
screwed it all up, and
that's
they're
powerful.
back to their mediocre ways, unfortunately.
Yeah. Um,
I drive a Lexus,
on that
actually.
note, what do you drive?
Yeah, and it was just funny because it's because
Okay.
Alan talked
So,
about it. Alexis, before he
that's
went into
fair.
Ford, they asked him. They said, "What do you drive?" When he was being interviewed by the press in Detroit, and he said, "Alexis." He said, "They're the finest cars ever made." um, and I agree.
Yeah, that's the mindset because they were absolutely crushing, and then Lexus stepped up their game so much. I don't know what time frame this is. I wasn't aware of it at that point, but it's crazy to see like the super large companies and the 20-year shifts from obscurity to
Yeah,
excellence, and
yeah.
then half the time back to obscurity. But yeah, so going back to the coaching and I'm sure you have so many lessons on this, but what are the things that you're seeing people ask for help with
Um,
constantly at this point?
so mostly they're just trying to grow. They're trying to scale in a healthy way, and many of them have hit one of two ceilings. One is either a growth ceiling that they sort of stop, or they sort of they're in this channel. They can't break out of this channel of a certain size, and they keep kind of getting bigger and then shrinking and then getting bigger and shrinking. Um, or some of them, this is rare, is they're growing so fast that they're hitting a ceiling. Right? They're just they this thing they've created is sort of out of
Hmm.
control, and they need to sort of wrestle it back in. So it's really about being stuck. Would be the best way to say it, and either of those two ways.
How much does mindset play into that as somebody's either struggling to break through or just things are out of control and they're trying to figure it out? How much does the mindset really play
Oh,
into
it's
the
it's
success
almost
or the
everything.
failure that they have?
People ask me, what kind of clients do you like to work with, and they're looking for attributes, right? They're looking for size of business, industry, whatever. And I say
Hmm.
I can teach anyone that runs a company what to do, because there are certain principles that the best companies use, and it doesn't matter what industry they're in. However, they need to be humble, hungry learners who are comfortable challenging the status quo. If they are not those four things, then I can't help them. If they're three of those four things, I still can't help them. They have to have all four of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was reading through some of your stuff and you had a list, and the first one was growth. And I think that is a mindset by itself. And I think a lot of people miss that of they don't recognize that is the goal. Like we're here to grow, whether that's ourselves or our business. And I have seen that. But I think your point also of the principles apply across so many different industries. Something we found with our clients was consistency pays off. And I think that's across the board. So, how have you been consistent over your career that's stretched over
Yeah,
so
that's
many different
interesting.
experiences?
I always say I wish I knew now what uh, uh, I wish I knew then what I know now. My life would have been so much easier. It wasn't terrible. I mean, I did pretty well, in terms of helping companies grow. I was never a founder. I generally did startups. I did 10 startups over 25 years. And I was usually in an operations role. So I was running sales or marketing or service or a combination of things, sort of a COO kind of thing. Um, and what I wish I could say I did this deliberately. I guess it was more sort of intuitive. Is I was always trying to get better myself, right? So I was always paying attention to the leaders I was with and what they did and how they made decisions. I read a ton on leadership and growing businesses and sales and all that kind of stuff. And so I was always trying to get better. And I I basically turned into what one would call a first principle thinker. So I was always trying to get to the root, right? What causes this thing?
Mhm.
What makes something successful? Um, and also try to understand second and third order consequence, right? So not only so if I make this decision, what's going to happen and what would happen after that. And so it was sort of that mindset that I had of always just trying to, as you said, grow and improve and get better. Um, that over time made me a better and better leader, I think, and and helped my companies do as well as they could. Now, I was never the founder, so some of the founders didn't want to listen to me, and that was fine. If you will, I sort of had uh, my satisfaction is unfortunately most of them went out of business after not soon after I left, within a few years. Um,
Mm.
and it's mostly because most founders have what I call founderitis, which is I'm sure someone else made that up, but I've said the term for many years now. Yeah, and it's basically you fall in love with your
It
idea,
sounds great.
and people don't care about your idea. People care about what your
Mhm.
idea does for them, and you have to fall in love with the customer and the problem, not the idea, because the idea will. If you fall in love with the customer and the problem, your idea will actually morph. It's probably a good initial idea, a good kernel, but then you find out, how it's being received and how it's being useful or not useful within a customer, and then you change, right? You modify things. Airbnb used to sell seat cushions as their first business. Uh, there are lots of businesses that start out with a completely different thing, and I did 10 startups, and there's only one that ended up being the ultimate idea that we used from what it was started as. Only 1 out of 10. So it's pretty you can't fall in love with the idea. If you do, you're in trouble.
That's a really good principle to live by. I had a mindset shift. I saw Bezos on some podcast, and he was talking about, you have to take everyone's idea and then pick the best idea. And that's normally not the first idea that comes out. And that was, and then the second part of that is everybody then has to get behind the winning idea. And I think pretty much no matter what you pick, as long as you execute on it to some level, like it's going to be successful. But, in the startup world, we all have our ideas and working from the principles basis of client first. So that's one of our core pillars is obsessed. And a lot of that is let's be obsessed with our clients and
Yeah.
helping them win at their mission. So, um, how have you looked at that side of it? How have you looked at the principles and the mission behind something and helped people grow
Yeah, so that's where
while
there's
maintaining that focus?
so I appreciate what you said, but I also found there's a danger in that, is that your job, and you mentioned Drucker earlier, and he didn't quite say it this way. I've modified his thing a little bit, but the main goal of any business, any commercial business, is in the creation of a profitable customer. That's your goal, right? And all the other things that you do are in service of that goal. Uh, and sometimes what we do is we put the mission in front of that. And we're trying to convince people of why they should work with us, as opposed to trying to find people who can use what we have. Right? It's not persuasion as it's much archaeology. Right? You're digging, you're discovering. And most businesses are like, you got to get
Hmm.
out there and convince people
Right.
to do stuff. And I'll tell you, I'm a neuroscience geek. You can't convince anyone to do anything they don't want to do. And by the way, they're rather find ways to not do something
Mhm.
new than to do something new. So they're always working against you, even if it's in their best interest, because we just don't like new stuff.
Right.
We don't like change. We don't like burden. And that's our brain, sort of working against us because our brain likes the status quo. And to move out of status quo, it takes energy and effort. And, our brain just doesn't like that. So you have to be careful when you sort of say this, it's the mission, as long as it's in service of helping your best clients, right? And it's not all clients are the same, but it's your best ones, right? It's the ones that are core, that
Mhm.
um are don't argue on price, see the value in what you do. They're always referring people to you. They're happy to be a reference if you ask, all those things that make the best clients, because that's where your profit is. Most businesses profit are 90% of their profit is in 10 or so percent of their customers. And, if you just apply the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule to that, it's interesting because if you do the math, if that's true, it's just 80-20. Let's assume it's 80-20 because the math's easier. Then
Mhm.
one of those customers that produces
Right.
80% of your profit is worth 16 times more than anyone else in the other group. So you need to get one of those versus 16. Now, what's easier? So if you could figure out what really that one is and try to find more of those, you don't need to find that many. And there's a quick story I'll tell with
I
when Steve Ballmer, who's running Microsoft, um, made a famous statement about the iPhone. And he said, no one's going to buy this thing. It has no keyboard. It's $500, and he sort of bitched and moaned about the whole thing. And in the end, he was actually right. In the first year or so, the iPhone was only 4% of the entire market. So technically, not many people bought it. However, it was 50% of the profit market. So he was making all the money. Yeah, you were selling lots of stuff,
mm,
but he was turning into his own country in terms of wealth, right? And Apple is worth more than, I'd say, 80 or 90% of the countries in the world, because they focused on being a delight, right? They've focused on joy to use, if you will, as a strategy. And that's worked for them for whatever it is, ever since he started doing that, 20 something years now.
right. Yeah, it's been an incredible story. I always tend to relate to Apple stuff because I looked up personality profiles and I'm like, oh, I'm matching with Steve Jobs. That doesn't mean I'm Steve Jobs though. Uh, and going back to the customer thing, I think that's something we struggle with even still. We've gotten better at it of identifying, hey, this isn't necessarily the right person to work with, and you want to chase and you want to grow, but how do you draw that line of
Yeah. So
this
what
is
I
worth
what I
pursuing
teach
versus
people
not
is you have to
pursuing?
understand what that is, right? What are those characteristics that you're looking for? And then I always recommend that you make a hell yes and a hell no list, right? So hell yes is absolutely fits all of them, or
Mm.
80, 90% of them. This is an easy decision. Hell no is just not going to happen.
Mhm.
Then you spend your time in the middle, right? Because which way do they go, right? It's the ones that are in the middle. 'Cause by the way, most of them are in the middle. And you have to determine, is there enough that I see here that's worth our time and energy to do it? Or do I need this? Sometimes you need customers and you just take them, right? Because you need to do payroll or whatever. But you have to know you're deliberately doing that. You're deliberately
Yeah.
doing that, and you're and you're
That's
you're
fair.
probably lowering your overall profit because you're doing that, right? As I said before. Um, so the hard part is um, determining why people buy from you. Is we have an intuitive sense, and it's almost always wrong. And so I'll tell you a quick story of a company that I worked with. I came in as the head of sales. I was asked to sort of grow the company into multiple channels, et cetera, which I had some experience with, and the guy before me didn't. Um, but I had begun to have this sort of mindset where I want to come in. I want to really understand why people buy from us. So I said, look, first 2 or 3 weeks, you got to give me some time. I want to talk to our best customers. And so could you give me a list of the best customers? And I sort of made a little survey, questions, et cetera. And one of the questions that was on the survey was, what is the most valuable thing that you got from using our service. And this was an online data backup service, a company called LiveVault. Eventually it was bought by Iron Mountain.
Okay.
So I talked to 17 people in the end, and 12 out of the 17 people, when I asked that question, said the same exact thing. But before I went and did that, I asked the CEO, my boss, who was the head of sales and marketing, and the product guy, why do you think our customers buy from us? And they all said the same exact thing, which was insurance. It's, they're happy to pay us a little bit every month. So just in
Hmm.
case something happens, they can get their data back or most of it back and get it back quickly. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty good answer because it was about the customer, not about the client. When I ask most people, now I've asked hundreds, if not thousands of leaders, CEOs, the same question. They often say, well, they work with us because we are awesome. And I'm like, they don't really care how awesome you are. They care what your awesomeness does for them, not that you're
Right.
awesome. So great. So I did this. I went out and talked to these folks, and those 12 people said, set it and forget it was the main reason. That was the most valuable thing because they were small to medium business owners, super busy, had 1,000 things to do, as you probably know. And you're saying, I don't have to buy the tapes. I don't have to label the tapes. I don't have to make sure they're stored in the right place. I don't have to make sure I got the right ones here. All I do is get online, hit a few buttons, and I never, ever have to worry about it again. How much does that cost? And they were on board. Yeah, so I told
Return
my
on
team,
attention.
this is why our
Yeah.
best customers buy. Say these words all the time. And then Iron Mountain bought us for like 10x revenue about 18 months after I started. It wasn't because of just that, but that was a factor. We just kept beating month after month. And this was a company I came in, was 9 years old and was struggling to really make it happen. And, again, it wasn't just me,
Hmm.
it was all of us. But we kept hitting, we beat month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year. And then finally Iron Mountain, who was a partner of ours, said, okay, you proved it. We're going to buy you.
Yeah. I, and that, you bring up team there, and people are such a vital part of all of this. And it shows that, when you came in and provided that value, it was a powerful thing. So how have you looked at the people aspect of building a business, and, how you
Yeah.
proceed in that?
So there's plenty of research on this. So teams do about 80 to 90% of anything in a business, right? It's done by teams, not by individuals. It's very rare that an individual is going to
Hmm.
really have a huge impact on a business. It's all done by teams. And the sad thing is we don't really teach leaders how to be great team leaders. Very few of us do, right? It's sort of like being a parent. You're just like, oh, well, you're a human being. You'll be a good parent. And guess what? There are some really good, great parents. There's some good parents, and there's some not so good parents. And so it's not sort of a innate, natural thing to really know how to run a great team. And that starts so the metaphor that I use is this sort of garage metaphor, right? So most people who have a team, it's rare that you sort of start with nothing and then build a team. I've done that a few times, right? I've been the only sales guy at a startup, and then my job is to figure it out and then hire the right people. But that's kind of rare, right? Most people are coming into a business that's already set, or a team, and they're taking over a team.
Hmm.
The story I like to tell, the metaphor I like to do is you're sort of handed this garage. It has all these parts in it, and you're said, here, go make a high performance vehicle from all these parts. And you go in, and what you do is you just sort of see what you have, and you try to fit things together, and you use duct tape and glue and whatever, and you sort of like try stuff, and some things don't work, but you sort of make do. Instead, what I recommend you do is figure out, what kind of high performance vehicle are you trying to build first? What's the terrain? Is this a Formula One situation? Is this stock car? Is this, you're going to run in Dakar or Baja and you're on the sand for 24 hours? I mean, it depends on what you're building. Then you go in to the
Hmm.
garage and you say, okay, now that I know I'm going to build and where it's going to be used, what do I have available to me that I can leverage? What doesn't quite work? What could I retool or whatever and make better? And what's missing? Then you can say, okay, this is what I have. And, you might have some stuff missing and you go back to your leader and say, look, here's what I've got. We're probably at 80% performance. To get to 100, I'm going to need this. But we don't do that. We don't even sit back and say, what do I have? And what am I trying to do? We just sort of take what we have and then cobble it together and then hobble along. Um, so that's sort of the main thing. The other thing is, we're crazy, right? People are by default, emotional, irrational, impulsive beings. And by the way, those are features. Those are not bugs. I mean, that's the reason we're here is because our ancestors ran away from stuff, right?
Good point.
Because if they didn't, they either fell over a cliff or got eaten by something or whatever, or ate the wrong berry and died, right? So all those people, Darwin showed that, they win the Darwin Award, right? And so us, you and I and others have this brain that's about being fearful first, right? Negative first. And we don't understand that. We think people are rational. We're not rational. By default, we're irrational. But we're predictably irrational. And you can sort of work with that. But most leaders don't work that way, right? They just sort of assume everyone thinks like they think and they all have to believe the same things. And so there's like so many aspects to running a team. And when you really understand how to do it well, you are far and away more likely to be successful, whether you're running a company, which is a team of teams, or your individual team.
Well, that's something I've been absolutely stepping into and trying to learn. I've been leading for a while now, and I'm at the phase where I'm starting to teach others to lead. And like I have a little bit of duplication for my stuff, but as an organization, how do you start
Yeah.
building
So
that second
there's this other
and third
concept I have,
level of
which is called
leadership?
so at a high level, it's called I call it or I sort of adopted this from someone else. It's eyes on, hands off leadership, right? So your job isn't to just step back and you still want to be paying attention. You want dashboards, you want information, etc. But you really, from a day-to-day perspective, your job is to keep your hands off, right? Is you should get people to a point where they can run the business without you. And that depends on the size of the business and all those kinds of things. But there are these three identities that I've come to believe that we have as leaders. One is a controller, one is a builder, and the other is an architect. So the controller is, sort of my guess is when you first started your business, you're a controller, right? You did everything, you made the decisions, you actually did the work, etc. You solve, you decide, right? You are the controller, which is important. But eventually, when you get big enough, you have to then you want to move towards architect. And the stage through architect is builder, right? You just mentioned it. I'm teaching people how I do stuff, right? I'm teaching them how to think like I think. I'm teaching them how to make decisions like I think, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, what you want is you want to build systems that have them as a group or as an individual do better than you ever could have yourself, right? You have to create an environment where they can solve and figure things out and improve on your skills because they're closer to the information. They're hopefully better at those things than you are in most cases. But you have to pick the identity depending on the situation. So for instance, if you lost 30, 40% of your revenue, you probably have to go into controller mode, right? You're in a crisis, you have to jump in, you have to do stuff, right? But you could also say, okay, now that we're out of that, we're fixing that. Let me teach you all how I did that, right? Because that worked. So then you can do it next time yourself. But then let's also work together on designing systems. So if it happens again, the system takes care of the problem, and we're just sort of managing the system as opposed to having to come in and be heroes and fix it ourselves. But you have to figure out which identity is applicable when, right? Because it's not like you're always an architect or always a controller. You have to decide depending on what's necessary. But often we just pick one identity and that's what we do. We apply it everywhere.
Mm. You mentioned decision making as part of that teaching. How do you
Well, I
teach
have
people
a
how to make
framework
decisions?
that I use. So first, you have to think about what is a decision, and this is sort of how I got into neuroscience because I was a sales guy in my 20s, and I was taught how to be a sales guy, and it was, oh, you need to know your product. You have to build rapport. You have to be likable. You have to understand your competition. All these things that you need to do. And I'm a pretty smart person, and I figured all that out. And I knew all these things. I got to tell you, Austin, I sucked at sales. I was terrible at it. And I'm like, why am I so terrible? I'm doing everything they said. I'm pretty likable.
Me too.
Pretty smart. I know our stuff. Um, and I said, well, then this was sort of my mindset, right? This is sort of where I got to where I am today I said to myself, okay, what is selling? And to me, selling in its truest form is helping someone else make a decision. Your job is to give them the information they need so they can make a good decision.
Mm.
So I'm like, okay, then how do you make decisions, right? And then decisions are generally made up here, right, in your brain. I said, okay, well, how does that work? And what I found out was when our brain lights up in decision mode. So you put someone in an fMRI and you have them make decisions, and you watch where the blood goes in their brain, right? And that's what lights up an fMRI. And the limbic system lit up first. So all the areas that are emotional lit up first, and they often lit up before the person was consciously aware that they had made a decision. So what happens is we emotionally make a decision, and then we make up the
Wow.
reasons for it after the fact. So we're basically lying to ourselves as to why we made a decision, because it's primarily, at least if you do it just sort of like gut instinct, it's an emotional decision. You can certainly slow your brain down and make it so it's not, right? And make sure that that's the right thing. So that's what I teach. I teach, here's what's going on in your brain. Don't just go with your first instinct. I think the gut is great, but you should check it, right? There's this thing, do a gut check and make sure that you're looking at it as objectively as possible, which is also very difficult because once we make a decision, we get emotionally attached to it. And then we ignore the things that go against the decision and only look for the things that support it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to understand all these things. So what I basically do is I teach people how to slow down when they're making a decision. And there's this great story with John F. Kennedy, the president of the United States, 30 something, 35th president of the United States. And he had two scenarios. I don't know how well you know him or what he did, but he had two scenarios. One was called, the Bay of Pigs,
Just
which was a disaster.
moderate amount.
And then the Cuban Missile Crisis. They happened within months of each other.
Right.
And what I really liked about it, the Bay of Pigs decision was terrible. And he sort of said, okay, we can't do that again. How do we do it differently? Because what he did was he just believed what people said. The CIA director said, oh, this is going to happen. He got information. He was involved in the process, and they were just sort of deciding how to do it as opposed to should we do it? And it was terrible, right? They were slaughtered. Their escape route was 80 miles away. By the time they figured out what they're going to do, it was 80 miles away from where they were. They were never going to get there. It was over horrible terrain. I mean, there were so many bad decisions that were made. And so he said, oh, we're going to do it differently this time. So what he did is he said, okay, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. He said, oh, we're going to apply this. He said, okay, what I want to do is first let's throw out all the potential things we can do. And they narrowed it down to two possible things after they sort of threw out all their ideas. One was blockade. The other was basically an offensive, like basically attack Cuba, which you're eventually basically attacking the Russians. So he said, okay, now we have those two ideas. He put them into teams. And he said, okay, you're the Hawk team. Go, let's go attack Russia. You're the Dove team. Let's do the blockade. I want you to go think through all those things and then come back and make your arguments. And he kept himself out of that process as much as possible because he knew that his own biases would be signaled. So he didn't want, like, if he nodded at something or leaned forward, like his team would be like, oh, he likes this. So he actually kept himself out of a lot of the discussions. So it was, so he wasn't influencing the decision. So they came back and he said, great, now I want you to switch teams and then argue the other side. And then he kept Bobby, his brother, and two other people out of the entire discussion. They heard nothing. And then once they said, okay, we're going to do this, they were called the Red Team. And their job was to come in and say why it's a terrible idea, right? Just shoot holes in it, poke it so it was better. And that worked out much better, right? That was only 13 days. They did all that in 13 days. And, eventually the Russians took the missiles out of Cuba, et cetera. So that's a different process than he had before. The first process wasn't a decision, it was a choice, right? Do we invade or not? Where the other one was a
Mhm.
decision where, what are all the possibilities that could potentially be done here? Let's talk through them all and then sort of rank them in such a way so we can try to come up with the best ones and then figure out the how of that. That's what I basically teach. I call it the 5C framework. It's, context, clarity, cl- you know, choosing, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Going through that process. So how have you used that process, and what have
Um,
you decided on
so
doing next?
my business, everything I teach my clients, I do myself. Um, and I'm just a one man band, right? I've hired and fired hundreds of people, and I don't want to do it anymore. And maybe I'll get to a size where I need another employee, but I don't really want another employee, to be honest with you. Um, so I'm trying to do things in a certain amount of time. I don't want to work any more than 100 days a year, uh, and still make a decent amount of money. So what I said is, but what I want to do is I want to affect a million people's lives, and so that's my goal. And I'm really short of it now.
Okay.
I have, maybe I'm 61, maybe I have 10, 20 years left to do it. Who knows? But I'm going to try. So I'm always thinking, how do I do that? What are the ways that I can affect people? And I can do clients, but and clients have a factor because I don't just say I'm affecting one person's life. I'm affecting if I affect a CEO, I'm also affecting his or her team and probably the family members of them. Because if they're better, they're happier, they're less stressed, then I'm affecting those people's lives as well. So I have a little factor that I use is factor 64. For every leader I work with, I multiply by 64. If I sell a book, it's one. I don't count. I
Nice.
don't count when I speak to people because it's hard to really know if I mean, I could probably do it, but I don't. Um, yeah, whatever, right? So I don't want to. I don't.
They could be
I
on
want
their
to try to
phone.
be.
Yeah.
I'm making everything up anyway, right? It's sort of just a one. It's just a guess. But that's sort of my model, right? But that's what I'm going for.
Yeah.
So everything
It's
that
all
I
made
think
up.
about, I'm thinking about how can I do that? How can I affect more people? And that's how I came up writing 6 books. And now I want to actually do some more than just. My first book was just self-published. It was almost for fun, if you will. I wouldn't call it a thought leadership book. It's a
Mhm.
curation of other ideas. But these books that I'm writing now, they're actually, I think I'm extending Drucker and I'm extending Porter. I'm doing things and saying, yeah, their stuff was great then, but we're now in a different world. And so we have to do things differently than we did before. And hopefully it's unique. I've heard some things that is unique, which is great. So that's sort of how I'm making decisions, right? Is how can I get to my million before I die? Um, and
Mhm.
that is my sort of rubric or filter that I do everything through. If it doesn't, if it's a vanity project, maybe I do it for fun. But like for instance, I'm a big fan of the Harvard Business Review. I don't know if you read it. Um, I've been reading it for 10 or 15 years. Um, that's a great platform. And I'm like, and I read their stuff. I'm like, hey, you know what? I think I could I think I could contribute to this thing, but it's a very, it's sort of a secret society. It's hard to get in, but I'm
It's a
in. So
small.
I'm going to
Yeah.
have an article and 15 million people subscribe to HBR.
Very cool.
So to me, that's worth my time and energy, right? I'm not going to reach 15 million people, but if I even reach a fraction, a percentage of that, 1% of that, that's still pretty good. Um, and then that gets me other stuff, right? So I'm always looking ways to leverage what I'm doing. So that's sort of that's how I do my decision making for my business and what I want to do.
Well, because you brought it up of, the world is a changing place, what do you think the most important things that people are maybe missing? What do they need to pay attention to now,
Yeah.
in order to continue to move forward, continue to grow? Because it's been a crazy couple years, and I don't think we're going to slow down. So, what do people
Yeah. So
really
great
need to
question.
know
And that's
that's
sort of what
important?
my whole series is about is there's this, uh, environment that many people believe we are in. I've pretty much come to believe that for the most part, most businesses are in this environment. It's called BANI, BANI, which is brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. Right. This is COVID, which, who would predict? But this is like Silicon Valley Bank, right? In
Mm,
in 24 hours, 40 some odd $billion was withdrawn from a bank. That has never happened before in the history of banks, right? And by the way, it was done because it was an operator who was working with an old model, right? Well, let me tell people what I'm doing. They'll feel better. And all what happened was Peter Thiel said, "This guy's nuts. I'm taking my money out. All of you should too." And he has a huge platform. And all of a sudden, $43 billion was gone. And now what was really a stable bank is now in receivership because of one sort of operational decision that was made, which was made rationally, right? You look back on it, you say, "Well, it's the stupidest thing you ever seen," but that's just how we did. We've been in business for 40 years. We're very honest with our clients. We let them know what we're doing. That's why we're the number one bank for startups, etc. So that's one example of many that we have, right? So the net of it is that planning is very nice, but you can't plan very far ahead anymore. You can certainly plan very far ahead if you want, but you have to understand that at any moment, something can change. So what you need to do is you need to create a company that can adjust quickly, right? You need to have those systems in place. Like I said, you need to have people who can run the business without you. So you're the one sort of thinking farther out, spending more time. So you're looking out versus looking down in the business, but also giving them an environment because they're going to see the information before you do. They're going to start to see these signals, these weak signals, and they're going to be like, this is kind of weird. And give them the ability to make decisions without having to, put it up the chain to you and then back down to them. So, because by the, Silicon Valley Bank, by the time they did that, 2 weeks would have passed and the bank's out of business, right? So you have to understand that we are in this place and we're moving more and more towards an unstable environment that you can't plan for with any certainty over any certain amount of time. So you have to create this environment. You have to create the conditions so you can pivot quickly.
That's fair. And since this is the Overpressure podcast, I got to ask, how do you handle
so
pressure?
I'm a stoic.
How do you
Are
teach
you
your
familiar with
clients to handle
stoicism?
pressure?
Yeah. So, so those
so.
of us who are listening who aren't, the basic premise is that you can't really impact what happens to you that much, but you can always control your response to it. So pressure, for the most part, is internally driven, right? Pressure comes from within. So you just have to decide, right? That how do I want to deal with this? Is this something that I want to slow me down, or is this something that I want to sort of lean into and try to work through and use it as a maybe an energy boost to get me somewhere else? So I've had a number of things in my life where I felt I was under pressure, and again, it was me doing it to myself. It didn't feel like it at the time, but looking back, and so that's sort of how I learned that. So I don't really do stress. I don't do worry. I don't do pressure. And that makes it easier for me when things get difficult to be able to think my way out of it.
You just try and focus on what you can control,
exactly.
which is what I try
Which
and
is,
tell
by the way, which is
Heather
not
all the
much.
time. Yeah, that's fair. So thank you for coming on today, Bill. Where can people find more about
Sure.
you, your services, and more about your books?
Everything's on my website. It's www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com. My book is on there. You can download my current book for free if you want. You can also go to Amazon or Audible, and I get like $3 or $4 every time you do that, which is cool. I write articles. I have about 200 articles up on my website. Very short, actionable articles. My newsletter surprisingly has a 50% open rate, which is pretty cool, and has been consistently for years. Yeah. So whatever I'm doing seems to be
amazing.
Okay. Because to me, I actually write for myself, but I write it so it's usable and actionable and short, right? I don't, if I get to 1,000 words in an article, that's a lot. So that's where you can find me, www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com.
Very cool. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and
I know I will.
hope you enjoy your massage later.